Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we're taking on a truly fascinating and, frankly, quite unsettling set of
Yeah,
sources.
it's definitely fascinating.
We have before us the latest newsletter from the Macro Butler, and it's got this provocative title, The Solar Health Effect.
Hmm.
Our mission today for you, our discerning investor, is to really unpack this material. We want to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights.
Quite a dense piece.
It is. And the big question is, what does the sun possibly have to do with your portfolio? Get ready, because it's almost certainly not what you think.
Yeah, what's truly striking about this newsletter is just how much it challenges, conventional wisdom.
Right.
It suggests that many of the really powerful forces shaping our world, think economics, public health, even geopolitical stability, they aren't primarily driven by politics or policy like we usually assume.
No, instead it's pointing to these deeper, almost cosmic cycles, things we rarely consider.
Exactly. Cosmic cycles.
It's audacious. The Macro Butler argues that the sun itself, the sun, is the silent orchestrator behind history's biggest turns. So let's unpack this. Okay, segment one, the sun's hidden hand. We're talking cycles, chaos, and maybe even the human pulse.
Well, yeah, the core premise here is quite bold. The newsletter uses this phrase, the sun has ancient authority,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the hidden metronome of civilization's rise and fall.
A hidden metronome. So it's saying it's not presidents or parliaments driving things.
Not primarily, no. It's these great merciless cycles that truly steer history, according to the source.
Wow. Okay, so connect that to the bigger picture then.
Well, the newsletter claims that as the sun descends toward a looming minimum, and that's, a period of much less solar activity, fewer sunspots, that kind of thing,
Okay.
possibly starting as early as July 2025, we could see a global convulsion.
A convulsion. Like what?
Like revolutions, widespread street rage, acts of terror. It suggests these aren't just random events cropping up. No, but instead they're ritual, recurring, rhythmic echoes of past collapses under, as it puts it, restless stars.
That's quite deterministic, isn't
A
it?
very deterministic view, yes.
And it gets weirder. The newsletter takes this influence even further. It claims the sun's impact isn't just geopolitical or economic.
Right, it says it reaches deeper into flesh, into mind, into the shadowy corners of the human soul.
Into flesh, into mind. Okay, how does the newsletter even begin to support a claim like that? That sounds almost mystical.
Well, that's where the source introduces some truly provocative data. It cites science suggesting that during intense solar storms, for example, heart attacks can actually spike.
Really?
Yeah, strokes multiply, overall mortality climbs. It even tries to link solar flares directly to sudden heart failure.
So a direct physiological connection.
That's the implication, yes,
Yeah.
between solar activity and our actual physical health.
And the mind doesn't fare any better, according to this source.
Apparently not, under what it calls geomagnetic assault, which is basically intense disturbances in Earth's magnetic field from these solar events.
Okay.
The newsletter claims darker instincts stir. It suggests homicide rates rise, tempers ignite more easily, impulses grow wild,
Goodness.
and it insists this isn't just metaphor or myth, it's the sun blazing in our blood.
The sun blazing in our blood. So for an investor listening to this, if the sun is truly influencing human behavior on this kind of profound scale, what does that imply for like general societal stability?
Yeah.
And our investments?
Well, implicitly, it suggests a lot. If fundamental human behavior, including our tendencies towards conflict or, social unrest, can be swayed by solar cycles, then the newsletter suggests we might be heading into a period of increased societal volatility, and crucially, one that goes beyond typical political or economic analysis.
So our usual risk models might miss something big.
Exactly. A huge underlying driver of instability, which, if you believe this, would push you towards more defensive or, let's say, resilient assets.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. If the sun influences us personally, our health, our minds, what does the Macro Butler say about its impact on, well, global health, the spread of disease?
Right. It dives into pandemics next.
It starts with a pretty basic observation, right? When the weather gets cold, so do your chances of catching something nasty.
Yeah, the classic flu season idea hits every fall because of cold air, people packing indoors, low vitamin D, less UV light. standard stuff.
But it goes beyond just the seasons.
Indeed, it does. History seems to back up seasonal patterns, of course. The source points out epidemics, from Roman plagues to modern flu spikes. They've always had seasonal elements. But it gets much more specific. It introduces this idea of a cosmic calendar.
A cosmic calendar for disease. What does that mean for predicting future outbreaks?
Well, this is where it gets really provocative. The Macro Butler claims pandemic viruses are like bad fashion trends. They always come back.
Okay, bad fashion trends.
And this cosmic calendar is supposedly the schedule for their return.
How does that work?
The newsletter argues that most pandemic virus subtypes like H2N2, H5N1, H7N9, those are big flu strains we know.
Right, I know those.
They seem to follow a pattern. They pop up roughly every 9 solar cycles.
9 solar cycles. A solar cycle is about 11 years, right?
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the cycle of solar activity, radiation changes, sunspots, flares. So 9 cycles is about every 100 years, give or take.
A century.
Exactly. And it cites the Spanish flu, COVID-19, even records of the Victoria pandemic, suggesting they might be reboots of older viral rock stars.
Wow. That is quite a theory. Is there an exception?
Yes, it mentions H1N1. That one might return every 12 solar cycles or maybe even as soon as 6. It's less clear.
So the sun's activity level doesn't necessarily stop them.
Apparently not. The source suggests that whether the sun is active or quiet, pandemics might just tag along for the ride. Well, for instance, it mentions that during low sunspot periods, the minima, maybe more mutagenic cosmic rays, get through Earth's defenses, potentially creating new viral strains.
And during active periods.
Conversely, during solar maxima, strong solar winds could also cause mutations. So it's presented as this complex interplay, almost like the viruses can leverage either condition.
Okay, so for you, the investor, the takeaway here isn't just when these things might happen.
No, it's the implication that these major outbreaks might be more cyclical, more predictable perhaps, than our usual models assume.
Which could change everything.
It could profoundly shift thinking, yeah. From just reacting to crises to maybe proactive long-term portfolio adjustments, especially in sectors like biotech, pharma, maybe even global logistics, supply chains, things that get hit hard. Are we ready for these recurring rock stars, as the newsletter puts it?
Building on that, the newsletter really hammers home what it calls a brutal truth. It's an equation. Migration plus war disease on a deadly scale.
Yeah, it paints a very grim picture, but one grounded in history.
It uses the Spanish flu as a prime example.
A chilling example, yes. It wasn't just a terrifying pandemic on its own. The source argues World War I turbocharged it. Millions of troops packed into trenches, trains, ships, terrible conditions. It created a perfect storm, a delivery system for the virus.
Leading to how many deaths?
Up to 100 million deaths, maybe more, far eclipsing the direct war casualties. The sheer movement and density of people in conflict just amplified the spread exponentially.
And this isn't just a one-off historical event, according to the source.
No, definitely not. The newsletter points to the Antonine Plague back in Roman times.
Yes, you mentioned that earlier.
Right, tragically brought back to Rome by Emperor Lucius Verus's supposedly victorious army from Mesopotamia around 165-166 CE.
And that plague just ripped through the empire.
Scorched the Roman provinces for years, killed millions, possibly even Emperor Marcus Aurelius himself. It really underlines this dark irony, military victory unleashing a devastating internal enemy.
And we see echoes today.
Tragically, yes. Modern conflicts, like in Syria, Yemen, they show what the newsletter calls the same playbook. Collapsing infrastructure, mass migration of displaced people.
And the diseases come back.
The rapid resurgence of old killers like cholera, measles. It's heartbreakingly predictable in these situations.
And the newsletter even projects potential future conflicts.
It does. It mentions potential phases of World War III around 2029 and 2032, specifically warning listeners about this historical pattern. War, disease, collapse.
Grim stuff.
It even cites precedents like the Black Death halving Europe's population, the Great Plague of Marseille. The core insight here for investors, though, is stark. Geopolitical instability isn't just an economic risk.
It's a public health risk.
Exactly. A public health risk that could cascade into societal breakdown, directly hitting everything from labor forces to consumer demand, supply chains, everything.
Okay, so given these potential crises, how do societies respond? The force draws some really stark comparisons between past and present responses to pandemics.
It does. It argues that back in 1918, with the Spanish flu, officials generally urged, calm, rational steps, hygiene, rest, fresh air.
Practical measures.
Right. But with COVID-19, it claims the response was very different. characterized by lockdowns, panic, and what it describes pretty strongly as authoritarian control disguised as public health.
That is a strong distinction.
It is. And the newsletter links this directly to societal division. It claims that during COVID-19, people who dissented were demonized, excluded, and silenced.
It draws a historical parallel.
A very dark one. It connects this directly to historical scapegoating, specifically the Black Death in the 14th century.
With the persecution of Jewish communities.
Exactly, where Jews were cast as the plague's villains, accused of poisoning wells, massacred. The source even makes the controversial claim that the infamous badge of identification Hitler later used was first employed during the plague era for similar purposes.
Wow. So the argument is that fear of disease can trigger these deeply irrational, destructive social reactions.
That's the core point it's making, yes.
The newsletter also touches on the origins of COVID-19 itself.
It does, briefly, mentioning it emerged from nature or most likely from an obscure lab in the Wuhan region, acknowledging the questions that still linger about the trigger and how SARS-CoV-2 mutated.
And then it brings up something called the Stargate Project.
Yes, this is another really provocative section. It describes this as a colossal, $500 billion AI mega initiative.
Born from what?
Apparently born from an old Cold War psychic spying program, believe it or not, now repurposed for biotech, especially focusing on mRNA medicine.
Backed by big names.
Yeah, figures associated with OpenAI and Oracle are mentioned. It promises AI-driven breakthroughs, which sounds good, but the newsletter frames it very differently.
Also,
It frames it as fitting into what it calls a Malthusian drumbeat, that's the idea of population control, and even connects it to a plandemic narrative, implying these events might be orchestrated.
very controversial framing.
Extremely.
And the source even challenges perceptions of political figures.
It does. It suggests that even a politician it labels the anti-vaccine chief might actually be playing poker with the MAGA base. Meaning, while appearing to oppose vaccines publicly, they might be quietly aligning with a Malthusian agenda and tech elites like Larry Ellison who are deeply involved in this mRNA wizardry.
So it's suggesting hidden alignments.
Yes. And it goes further, questioning whether mass vaccination campaigns themselves, like for COVID or potentially avian flu, might actually unintentionally, perhaps, accelerate viral mutations.
That's a perspective that definitely challenges the mainstream scientific consensus.
It certainly does. So for investors, what this segment really highlights, at least from the newsletter's viewpoint, is the potential for these huge technological leaps in biotech AI, mRNA, to be viewed through a highly controversial, politicized lens.
Which could create turbulence.
Absolutely. It could impact public trust, regulation, market reception, creating both, potentially massive opportunities, but also profound ethical debates and market risks. At least that's how the newsletter frames it.
Okay, given all these profound and, frankly, pretty unsettling claims, cosmic cycles, war, disease, controversial tech, the immediate question for you, our listener, the investor, becomes, how on earth do we navigate this? What does the Macro Butler actually advise?
That's the critical pivot, isn't it? Where does this lead in practical terms?
Right.
The newsletter issues a pretty stern warning. It claims that as of July 4th, 2025, the U.S. is technically in an inflationary boom.
Okay.
But, and this is the key, with the S&P 500 to gold ratio stuck below its 7-year moving average for exactly 5 months, it predicts an inflationary bust will materialize much sooner than Wall Street pundits are eager to tell their clients.
Sooner than expected, a bust is coming.
That's the forecast, which raises the big question. If that bust is coming, what's the strategy?
And the answer isn't business as usual.
No. The newsletter urges a fundamental shift in mindset. Move away from focusing purely on return of capital.
Focusing on return of capital, preservation first.
Exactly. Capital preservation becomes paramount.
And the solution, according to the Macro Butler, what's the safe harbor?
Real assets. It declares quite emphatically, Goldilocks is gone. Golden lots is the new survival playbook.
Goldilocks is gone, golden lots is in. Okay.
And what's compelling here are the specific recommendations all framed for this potentially volatile future it predicts.
Like what?
Physical gold and silver, highlighted as the only reliable hedges against reckless and untrustworthy governments and bankers.
Why only them?
Because, the newsletter argues, you own them directly. There's no counterparty, no surveillance. It's positioned as a hedge against actual system failure or overreach.
Okay, gold and silver. What else?
Beyond precious metals, it recommends broader commodities generally. The rationale is protection as global supply chains fracture, which it sees as likely.
Makes sense as supply chains break down.
And for cash.
For cash management, it advises favoring short-dated U.S. dollar investment-grade bonds and T-bills. Keep durations very short, not longer than 12 months.
And avoid long-term bonds.
Unequivocally, it states that long-dated U.S. treasuries and bonds are an uninvestable, returnless asset class in the kind of environment it foresees. Just stay away.
Got it. What about stocks? Equities.
In equities, the advice is to seek out specific types of companies. Lean, low-debt, high cash flow businesses.
Buy those.
Because they're potentially poised to gain from trends like reshoring, ongoing trade wars, and, grimly perhaps, rising defense budgets. These are the kinds of companies, the newsletter argues, that can better weather inflationary storms and economic contraction. They might even benefit from these geopolitical shifts.
Any specific sectors mentioned beyond that?
It does touch on investing in genomics-focused ETFs like ARKG and PBE, but it adds a significant caveat.
Which is?
Acknowledging the ethical tightrope investors must walk when participating in technologies that might be aligned with what it controversially calls that broader Malthusian narrative. So invest, perhaps, but be aware of the narrative context.
Interesting ethical dimension there. And beyond just financial investments.
Yes, it strongly advocates for practical preparedness, too. Things like stockpiling 12 to 24 months of essential healthy food.
Wow, that's significant.
And acquiring silver coins specifically for barter. The idea being if the system really does collapse or seize up.
You need tangible means of exchange.
Precisely. As it says, gold won't just gleam, it will endure. It really pushes a message of self-reliance alongside financial strategy.
So we've taken quite a journey here, a deep dive into the Macro Butler's The Solar Health Effect. We've covered everything from the sun's supposed hidden influence on health and history
to these cosmic viral calendars.
The deadly equation of war and disease, those complex societal responses, scapegoating.
And finally, landing on these stark choices and strategies facing investors today.
Yeah.
This exploration really does emphasize how the newsletter tries to connect these, ancient-seeming patterns with very modern challenges. It paints this picture of interconnected cycles guiding our world.
It certainly does.
And it definitely highlights the importance of critical thinking when you're navigating such dense and often pretty unconventional information.
It really does make you think, doesn't it? The source actually concludes with a quote. It's from Samuel Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy.
Oh, what's the quote?
It states, "Medicine is a science of experience. Its object is to eradicate diseases by means of remedies. The knowledge of disease, the knowledge of remedies, and the knowledge of their employment constitute medicine." Kind of an interesting grounding thought, maybe.
Grounding it in experience and knowledge.
Yeah. So for you, our listener, maybe here's a final thought to mull over. If history truly is repeating, if these cycles are as immutable as the sun, like the Macro Butler suggests, how much agency do we really have as individuals, as investors? How much control do we have in shaping our own outcomes?
Well, that's a big question.
Or maybe in such a world is a preparedness itself that focus on resilience, on tangible assets, on self-reliance, is it the ultimate act of defiance against what seems inevitable?
A profound question to consider as you go forth, indeed. Something to really chew on.
We certainly hope this deep dive has offered you a powerful shortcut to being well-informed, packed with some surprising facts, and maybe some practical insights for these uncertain times.
Hopefully some food for thought.
Absolutely. Until next time, stay curious, stay prepared, and keep